Like many people, I've lost a family member and a good friend to sudden heart attack. Sadly, sudden cardiac arrest kills between 23,000 and 33,000 Australians each year. But many of those people may not have died had a properly implemented and monitored defibrillator been close at hand. That's the call now from the Cardiac Arrest Survival Foundation. They would like to see defibrillators rolled out into our workplaces and public spaces, such as sports grounds, shopping centres and on public transport. And a supporter of this call is Dr Donald Dingsdag, Senior Lecturer in Occupational Health and Safety at the University of Western Sydney. Donald, welcome to Mornings.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me on the program.
What does research tell us about the use of defibrillators in their capacity to save lives?
Well, what research tells us is that provided, as you just said in your introduction, that they're properly monitored and so forth, they will function in every case. And providing that the defibrillator is applied within the first 10 minutes after the cardiac arrest, the patient will in all likelihood survive, although there's a 10% decrease for every minute that defibrillation isn't applied.
But still, 10 minutes is a very large window of opportunity, which is a bit of a surprise to me.
It is, but what we need to remember is that frequently ambulance call-outs, look, I can't be certain because of that, but say, for example, in some metropolitan areas, you'd be lucky if an ambulance attended within 15 minutes, which would be too late.
Well, obviously, if you're going to roll out defibrillators, they need to be in a place of maximum usage, don't they? It's all very well to have a defibrillator available in a public space, but if it's not in a space that people can get to, then it's not going to be very effective.
Absolutely. You're spot on. So the issue is not only to have the defibrillator regularly maintained and preferably monitored 24/7, because research tells us from the United States that 1 in 5 defibrillators malfunction because of lack of regular maintenance. But what's also important is, as you say, is to have them highly visible and accessible.
Do we have any statistics on where most sudden fatal heart attacks are occurring? Do we know if they're in the home or at workplaces or in public spaces?
Well, all of those, but risk assessment models tells us, and there's one in particular from the University of Washington in the United States, which they conducted a so-called PAD trial, which was to do with public access to defibrillation, and on a risk basis. And the risk model tells us that there are a few factors, but in particular, as you suggest, where there's a critical mass of people, there's a much greater likelihood of somebody suffering a cardiac arrest.
Well, Donald, just hold the line, please. We're talking to Dr Donald Dingsdag, a Senior Lecturer in Occupational Health and Safety at the University of Western Sydney. The month is being called Shocktober by the Cardiac Arrest Survival Foundation. I've asked for your experiences, and Kirsty is called in on 1300 222 891. Good morning, Kirsty.
Hi, how you going?
Very well, thanks. What's your experience?
Well, I actually used to work for a regional council, and the staff put a request forward to have defibrillators placed in each of the main council offices, which there was 3. And that was through the OH&S committee that requested it. We had several staff who had or were at risk for a heart attack. So we thought that would be a great thing to have in our workplace. And it wasn't a cost issue that the management came back with, but they said to us they'd sought legal advice and were advised that if we had a defibrillator in the office and someone collapsed on the street outside and we went out with the defibrillator and did not use the defibrillator appropriately to try and revive the person, maybe we took too long, or we made an error in the process, which would be pretty difficult because they're pretty easy to use. They said that then the council would be open to
being sued. Yeah.
And so I think the first major step that we've got to do is make sure that the legal system doesn't put a barrier there for people to use as an excuse.
That's a good point. So they ended up not putting them in for that reason?
Yep. So none of the officers have a defibrillator. Like I say, there's one staff member in particular who had a heart attack and had undergone other things. We'd had a staff member also pass away with a heart attack, but they were out. They were actually out in a regional area, and wouldn't have been near a defibrillator even if there was one in the office at the time. So that wouldn't have helped them. But we just figured that it was a good thing to have as a resource in the community, not just for our office, but being located in the main street in each town. It was a good place for the local people to know there'd be one there.
Yeah, well, Kirsty, that's a very interesting experience. Thank you so much for calling in. We'll put that back to Dr. Donald Dingsdag, Senior Lecturer in Occupational Health and Safety at the University of Western Sydney. Donald, I imagine that the way the legal system would look at it was to look at the reasonableness of the actions taken by somebody. I find it hard to believe that that's an excuse used for not installing it.
Well, yes, I listened to Kirsty with some concern. And you're right, it probably was an excuse not to roll out defibrillators, whereas in fact the legal position taken on that was entirely wrong, because every jurisdiction in Australia has so-called Good Samaritan legislation on the statutes.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Donald, you've got a personal reason for being such an advocate for defibrillators being more openly accessible and available. Can you tell us your own story?
Absolutely. 25 years ago, nearly, next month it will be 25, my then 33-year-old wife, just having given birth to our two young children, died of a cardiac arrest in her sleep. She didn't even wake up. So
that's terrible.
It was awful. It was awful, and it's still a tragedy today for my two sons because they can't remember their mother. And unfortunately, in this instance, even if I would have had a defibrillator in the home, I would not have been able to save her because she just slipped away in her sleep. She didn't even wake up.
But there are plenty of people who show symptoms and are alert and awake and could call for assistance that could be helped by a defibrillator.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, the irony is that my then wife, she didn't have a very high pain threshold, and she said to me 6 weeks before her death, darling, I'm feeling tingling and pain in my left arm, and I dismissed it. And I said, don't be silly, there's nothing wrong with you. But nevertheless, she went to our local GP, and he attended to her and gave her the usual, medical checkup where if you display those symptoms, and he gave her a clean bill of health. And why wouldn't he have? We had a 1-year-old child who had just finished breastfeeding, and to all intents and purposes, my wife was a healthy young woman, and there were no indications other than the pain in the left arm.
That's another reminder to us to pay close attention to any symptoms that we might have. Well, Donald, thank you for telling us about your own personal experience and for telling us why you support Shocktober for the Cardiac Arrest Survival Foundation. It's been good to speak with you.
Thank you for having me on your program. The Foundation's truly grateful. Thank you.
Dr. Donald Dingsdag, Senior Lecturer in Occupational Health and Safety at the University of Western Sydney. And just go to the Cardiac Arrest Survival Foundation website if you would like to find out more information about defibrillators.